I thought we could cover walleye fishing first.
Sure.
So fall walleye fishing. So that is something that I have almost no experience with. Andrew as well. We fished walleye during walleye, like prime walleye season, like, spring, early summer. Yay, walleye. They're easy to catch. They're predictable.
Yep.
But I have no clue where the heck they go in the fall. So please tell us.
So with my area, the Kawarthas, I'm going to split it into two kind of categories, because if you look at the Kawarthas, it's really in two geographical zones. You got the Canadian Shield and you got the St. Lawrence Lowlands. And if there was a line that you could draw to divide these two regions, it's going to go right through the Kawartha Lakes, to the point where some of them have half of it that's in the St. Lawrence Lowlands and half of it that's in the Shield. Like Pigeon, for example, the north end of Pigeon, you're getting into some rocky, some, more, what's the
Like
rock
shale?
that I'm having a brain. Yeah. You're going to have more of that up there. And then you go down to the south end near Omimi and stuff, and it's weedy and right, like a skugog or whatever.
So
So
speaking of that quick, I just want to say I grew up fishing Pigeon River for
yep.
years. Since I was 4, we went camping at Emily Park. And I had never got up into the lake before. And I always thought Pigeon was just shallow, weedy. And then one day we went up into the lake and I was like, it's like a different world up here. It's completely different. There's rocks everywhere. My mind was blown. Anyway, continue.
So you have the two zones, and with those two zones, fish act differently. Walleyes being a perfect example to kind of go off here. So when you're dealing with the walleyes that are living in the St. Lawrence Lowlands, the weedy stuff, most of the time, like let's imagine that it's not Pigeon here, and they can just travel up to the north end and find that deeper water. Let's imagine it's like a skugog, for example, where the whole lake is shallow predominantly,
Not that
right?
you can fish for walleye there, people.
So,
This is an example.
yeah, don't fish for walleye and skugog, or let's say rice, for example. Rice is a better example because it's actually you're allowed to do it there. So with rice, in the spring and summer and stuff, you're catching them on shallow weed lines. I've caught walleyes in like 5 feet of water early on Rice Lake. But then as the fall comes, they're pushing off to, again, the deeper side of these weed lines. They're not going out into the middle of the basin where there's nothing. They're going to stay on that structure, but on the deep side of that structure. It's, the water is not fluctuating as much there. They're walleyes. They don't love the light, so they're down in that weed. Nighttime, I don't fish a ton at night, but they may push shallow at night at times. But when you're out there during the day, you're going to find them in that deeper weed. Maybe there's some rock around too. Rock holds heat. If there's bait around, walleyes are finding that bait too. They're where the smallmouth are. I catch lots of walleyes in the fall when I'm smallmouth fishing on smallmouth baits that are, scooting along the bottom, because that's where they are. They're on the bottom in the deeper weeds and stuff, chilling. Now, if we're talking Shield, where you have that deeper water, wintertime, I think a lot of those fish are very deep, like Stony Lake. I'm sure those fish use depths that they don't use on some of the other Kawarthas, 50, 60, 70 feet even. But when it comes to fall walleyes on the Shield stuff, you're going to find them, if they're feeding up on humps, maybe there's that deeper water access, but they're going to roll up on that weed hump. Again, you need the bait. They're not going to be in areas where there's no bait. So you need the bait and you need the healthy weed, because the bait won't be there if there's no healthy weed. But they're going to be relating to that transition between the shallow to the deep. Canadian Shield stuff with all that deep water, the areas that are shallower, like even 10 feet, let's say, right? Say it's a hump where the top of the hump is 10 feet and then it drops into 30, 40, whatever, right? They may hang out off of that hump, and then when they want to feed, up on top in the weeds, and then back down, right? And then when it gets wintering, you may find them in the same spots, but I bet you're going to find a lot of them down off the hump, just chilling down at the bottom of the hump, not moving, not right up on top. So it's different when it comes to lake, especially with walleyes, because they act different on different bodies of water. Like even Rice Lake is different because you got the river systems that are going in there and stuff. But again, you're looking at deeper stuff. You're looking at the deeper side of the weed lines. You're looking at humps that go from shallow to deep. It's got to have that transition. You're not going to find them on the same shallow weed lines that you did in the spring or just outside the river mouths coming out of the spawning grounds. They just really won't be in those zones. They're going to go back there in the spring, right? So in the fall, they're on these zones where they're going to hang out for the winter, or or they're close by their spots that they're going to hang out for the winter, but they still want that shallow access to feed and bulk up for the winter, right? That's what they're all doing. They're bulking up because they're not going to move around a lot in the winter. Things are going to slow right down. Their metabolisms are going to slow down. And
that seems like pretty much the deal. What I hear from everyone's like, say walleye, like you're talking about, or like musky, is you have to find a weed line close to deep water access, because these fish, like you said, they want the stable temperature.
Mhm.
And shallow water, it's like it fluctuates. So they're like, okay, they just go deep when they want to feel comfortable. When they're hungry, they go up the hump and they feed. And then, they get scared or they're full, they go back down.
Yep.
So all these spots, that may sound daunting to someone who's just getting into fishing, or maybe you just got a boat and you're like, well, how do I find that? Again, navionics.
Perfect
Easy
way.
enough to find humps on that. You can shade certain areas, look for areas where, it's deep. And all of a sudden you look and the contour lines, the topographic lines go up and, oh, it's only 10 feet there or 12 feet there, and it's surrounded by 40 feet. Those are all spots that are high percentage areas. And again, you have to have nice weeds on the top. If you go to the top and there's nothing there, then it might not be the best spot. So
Maybe
there
it's
is a little bit of searching involved, but navionics, we were just complaining about how much it went up in price.
I know.
Last time I bought it, it was $30, and I just bought it the other day again.
$89.99 or something.
$90 with tax. And I'm like,
yeah.
But at the same time, I know that it's a tool we use all the time, especially for ice fishing and stuff. But yeah, I'll put the link down below for navionics. If you haven't seen it before, you can check it out before you buy it.
The other thing on navionics is like, look for tight contours. So like you're going to see those contour lines, and if they're further spaced apart, that means it's more of a flat, right? But if you get those really tight contour lines where it's almost like, they're so tight that it's like just a black little blob on the screen. That's a tight contour, which means it's a slope. It's a steep slope, and there's a good chance that there'll be some fish around there, especially if there's some rock or some weed around. So
and don't the fish, like, I know, like on steep areas, like I remember Andrew was telling me this, the fish will like pin bait fish against those steep cliffs, kind of. Weren't you saying that, Andrew?
Species, like especially like Lakers and stuff like that, they'll corral them right to the side. Yeah. Any so that's why you'll even have some things they'll like any edge for the bait. So maybe even the surface of the water could be against shore, could be just again in that deep water column, a sharp drop off. They can push, and it's eliminating an area for the bait to flee to. So it's higher percentage for hunting for these fish.
Man, those fish are pretty brutal. They're just like right against the wall.
We were talking with what was that guy at Musky, the Musky Odyssey there? We saw him talking, Jesse.
Stephen Paul from Musky 360.
He was mentioning it. We had another couple other, I can't remember the guests we were talking about. It may have been Dan from Great Lakes Finesse, but and I think Halliburton Fishing Guide, another guy, like we were talking to different people, and what I hear all the time is, like I said, tight contour lines. Because what I've learned over the years, or what I've been learning from others, is fish like musky or walleye or whatever have no issue moving up and down in the water column. They want to move horizontally as little as possible. So if they can just kind of regulate their buoyancy to just sink back down, they'll do that. It takes a lot less energy, I guess. And then they can get to the feeding grounds just by going up and down vertically, rather than, I have to swim across this big flat, half a kilometer. And yeah, it's true. There's, 10 feet there and there's 30 feet over there. But right here on this rock edge, there's 10 feet and 30 feet. Like, it's right there for them.
Yeah. So they're like helicopters. They can go any direction. Or I guess submarines. That would be better.
It's a great tip. Tight contours. Like if you can look at a map before you go to a new lake and you can just pick out a few spots that have those tight contours, try those spots first. There's a good chance that somewhere around them there's going to be some fish, just because you have that access, that shallow to deep access, the convenience of it,
And I was telling Bobby earlier before we hit record, I was trolling the St. Lawrence with Mike from Waterwolf Lures 2 weeks ago, And that's what we were looking at, because the St. Lawrence, like where we were fishing anyway, it's just like featureless. It's like, what the heck? Like, where are you supposed to fish? And he was like I learned a lot from him. He was showing me on his unit. He's like, look for these tight lines and we're going to troll through there. And some of them would the lines would kind of come out to a little point and he's like, guaranteed fish right there. And we smacked a fish on that point. So like learning how to read navionics or topographic maps, it's a huge deal. It'll help you become a better angler. You'll catch more fish. So definitely. Okay. So with walleye fishing, what are 3 of your top baits? And again, we're talking Kawartha area because that's where Bobby fishes. So if you live up near Lake Superior, don't get mad, but we can't have guests from every zone weighing in at the same time. There's like 20 windows open. But what are 3 baits that you use in the Kawarthas for walleye?
Walleyes. So number 1, a Ned rig on bottom. Drop it right to bottom. They like longer Ned rigs than stuff that you would use for smallmouth. So like an example is a Z-Man, the traditional Ned rig, the Z-Man TRD, for your bass. You up it to a hula stick, a little bit longer. That's a great choice for walleyes. Number 2, a small swim bait on a ball head, essentially. You can fish it on bottom. You can swim it. You can drag it. You can do a lot of stuff with it. That's a fish catcher everywhere, but it's a good one for walleyes. I catch a lot of walleyes on those. And third, are we talking fall or are we talking just in general?
Just fall, but you can also throw us a bonus in general one if you want.
Sure. So in general, like a lipless crankbait is a great search bait for it.
Ooh.
I say that all the time in a lot of, my posts, especially during walleye season. I preach the lipless crankbait. It's great. It's a search bait that you can fish in any depth. You're not restricted to a certain depth like you are with a crankbait. You can fish it in 20 feet. You can fish it in 5 feet. So a lipless crankbait is big. But the other thing that's great for the fall with walleyes, that especially late fall, I will say, and it's really good when they're on that deeper structure, is a blade bait. I do some cool stuff with a blade bait in like November. I do it for smallmouth too, but you catch a lot of walleyes in the process, and you're just triggering a reaction strike with them. You're snapping this blade bait off the bottom. The walleye's chilling right on the bottom, and that blade bait comes right down in his face. And when you snap it,
So blade bait, you're talking like a vibrato or a cicada, not like a chatterbait, not a bladed jig.
Like a head and sonar.
No, not like a chatterbait, like a jackal keyburn, like a blade, or what's like the original one, a Johnson
Head and sonar. Remember those?
Yeah, I don't remember those. No.
So a blade bait, it's, if you don't know what a blade bait is, it's, imagine a lipless crankbait, but just a thin piece of metal.
Like a steel shad.
Yeah.
You see those at most tackle stores.
It's like
a thin fisher.
Is it vibrato, I think? I'm thinking of, Jesse.
Vibrato's like that spoon that Sebile makes. I think it's more classified as spoon, but it's kind of along the same lines. A blade bait's, the thing with the vibrato is you have the hooks on both sides, whereas the blade bait, you have the hooks underneath the bait, and it kind of looks like a crankbait. A lot of the times the blade bait hooks too, instead of having full trebles, they'll only have 2 prongs, so that when that bait goes down to the bottom, the prongs are kind of up like this. Instead of having a prong that goes down into the bottom, they're seated up so that you don't snag up as much.
Yeah. I think the one that me and Andrew have used the most is that new Rapala V blade. Remember that, Andrew?
Yes.
Something like that.
I don't remember who
So
makes it. It's a cicada, I think, too. Which looks like a a willow leaf blade, almost. Like it's concave in the one side. It's like a lead belly. And same thing.
Yeah, isn't that
it might be Hedden? I know it was kind of a classic name. I just can't remember exactly manufacturer, but quite possibly could be Hedden.
Yeah, blade bait. Little bit of a sleeper thing, but they work too.
Sweet. I've even heard, I was watching some musky guys using the steel shad, but they have a big one. It's like, I think 6 inches, and they're just like jigging on the bottom. But
that's cool.
Definitely cool. So speaking of musky, we're going to get into musky. And this is, this is why I asked Bobby on, so I could get more musky tips for this fall, because, I always need musky tips because they suck. So when it comes to musky fishing in the fall, I honestly think it goes without saying, it's pretty common knowledge that musky fishing is the best in the fall. That's what all the guys say. Their favorite time to musky fish. It's usually October, September, late September, October. That's when, the fish are feeding up for the fall. They're getting big, they're getting fat, and they may be slowing down a bit, like speed wise, but they're trying to eat big fish, big things too. So some of the techniques that you use in the fall, it's pretty fun. It may be painful to throw, like your shoulder throws out, but we're gonna ask Bobby, what is the key to success for musky fishing in the Kawartha area in the fall, in your opinion?
You need to follow the other species of fish, essentially. Again, I know I've said this quite a few times, but everything is condensed, right? So if the smallmouth and the walleye are on a spot because there's a bunch of shiners on it, there's a good chance that at some point during the day, there's going to be a muskie that rolls in there to feed, right? It's not going to be there all the time. It's not going to be there active all the time, but it's going to show up there at some point. I think staying on bait is like the biggest thing in the fall as a whole. That's the biggest tip I could give, because the bait is going to be all in those condensed areas, and that's where all the other fish are going to go. But that being said too, with the fall, kind of what we were just talking about those contour lines is very important too. In the summertime, you can catch muskies up pretty shallow, in front of lily pad patches, even like shallow with bucktails and stuff. And I don't do that stuff come the fall time. Come the fall time, I'm fishing shoals. I'm fishing deep weed lines, shoals that have deep water close by, I should add. Again, you need that deep water access. You need that healthy weed, and you need that bait. That's the biggest thing. And in terms of muskie specific, I think that's the biggest change, is you step away from that shallow, weedy, bucktail, quick moving bait bite, and you get into that bigger bait, deeper water. Now, some guys chuck deep all year. Like, that's not to say that you can't catch muskies on that stuff in the summer, because that's totally not true. You can't. But in the fall, you're not going to find them up in that shallow stuff like you would. They're not going to be there anymore. They're going to be out on this other stuff. And that's what you should spend your time focusing on, is that deeper weed line, shoal stuff.
Is
deeper
there
water.
like a water temperature that you look for in that fall period of when you expect those muskie to move off, or any like telltale factor? Like, are you waiting to see till the shallow weeds are dying or dead before those muskie have moved off? Like, what kind of tells you? What signs are you looking for to know that this is the time? This is now. Again, like we said, years are crazy. It says it's fall on the calendar.
Yeah.
Is it fall on the lake for the fish's minds, for their
Right.
for what they're doing? So what signs do you look for to think of, okay, muskie, I'm not going to fish shallow anymore because it's telling me they should be deep now?
Once the water gets below 65, let's say, that's why we're in fall transition right now, is the water did go down to that, but then it went right back up to now we're in the 70s again, right? And summer held on there, and now we're still in that summer stage, right? But we had a cold front today, and if it stays cool like this a little bit longer, that water will drop a little bit more. And as that water temperature drops, your weeds are going to die off. And that's that fall transition. That's when fall really kicks in, is the air temperature drops. And when the air temperature drops for long enough, the water temperature will drop. And then, okay, now we're in fall, which it's upon us, it's going to happen. It could be the start of it right now. It depends what happens with the weather, right? If it gets hot again, maybe summer holds on a little longer. But, 65, when it starts getting below 65, like that's fall. You're into fall.
If the water temperature is 65, let's say, like, is there a visual difference to the weeds, or do they still look green? But because of water temperatures, they're starting to die, and so the fish have already picked up those signals and they're already moved out.
There's going to be some healthy weed somewhere on the lake, and that's where those fish are going to move to, right? But a lot of that weed is going to die. One thing you're going to find is that, and this is a little bit, we could get into a whole conversation about different kinds of weeds, but you're going to see a lot of pond weeds and a lot of milfoils in the Kawarthas. And milfoil is going to stay alive longer than the pond weed. The pond weed grows in first. It also dies first. So even now, I'm noticing some of the pondweed is dead. If you go up into the shallows, or you're catching it as you're retrieving in baits, big strands of brown
And pondweed is the big leafy weeds,
but
like cabbage, right? Yeah.
Leafy stuff. Yeah, leafy stuff. There's usually two kinds that you're going to see a lot in the Kawarthas: curly leaf pondweed and Richardson's pondweed. The Richardson's pondweed's the one you guys have all seen with the big leaves. It almost looks like a tropical plant.
Pondweed. Whenever I see it, I'm like, there's fish here.
Yeah. Or musky weed, they call it, right? So that stuff's dying off right now. In a week or two, it's all going to be dead. It's going to be brown everywhere. But the milfoil, whether it's northern milfoil or coontail or Eurasian milfoil, whatever species it is, that stuff lives a little bit longer, and that's the stuff that you're going to find these fish accumulating around in the fall, because that stuff, you'll have areas that will stay alive right into late October that, that have some greenness to them.
We were ice fishing on Kuchiching last year, and we were going for perch, and we're sitting in about like 15 to 20 feet of water. And we're like, oh, we got to move. There's too many weeds. And we were pulling up all this like tail stuff.
Yeah. And it was green. Yeah. It's funny though. So from, to summarize this small part of the conversation, you said where to find these muskie, and you're like, follow where the other fish are. And if you're wondering right now, well, where are those other fish? Clearly you haven't been listening, because Bobby has already told you. So pay attention, people. But the other thing that I've had so many people tell us when me and Andrew started muskie fishing a few years ago is find green weeds. That's what they say in the fall, because like you said, all these weeds are dying off. And when the weeds die off, it makes the area not very attractive to a fish. So they're going to move to green weeds, which attract, have all the little water bugs in them, and the minnows come to eat the water bugs, and the sunfish and perch eat those things, and then the muskie follow the bigger fish too.
And crayfish too.
You find those things.
Primarily eat vegetation. So like we often think of them as living under a rock, but they actually act like most of them are found in the weeds. And that's where, when smallmouth are eating them, they're pecking them off the side of the weed stalks and stuff. So they're even, like you said, bait and stuff like that, little water bugs. But even something that's feeding a larger, prey animal that's feeding right on those live weeds is going to be crayfish. Yeah.
And remember, just a quick story. Me and Andrew went out. We were on one of the Kawartha Lakes. We were fishing. We caught one right in the morning, which was pretty cool, on a suic. But we couldn't find fish in the afternoon. And all of a sudden, we found this area, and we were seeing bait fish everywhere, like bait fish, sunfish. You could see them everywhere in the shallows. And we got 6 or 7 follows in this huge bay. And the fish were just packed in that area. And the rest of the areas that we had fished, they looked very similar. But we didn't see any bait fish. We didn't see any, bass, anything like that. And there was no muskie there. But in this bay, when we found them, they were almost packed in that little bay. So it really goes to show you that if you find these things that the muskie are looking for, obviously they're going to be there. So that's cool. Yeah. I thought we could go into baits quick. And I'll tell you my little tube jig story. Because remember, Andrew was saying, if you can just get a guide or someone that helps you just gain a little bit of confidence, even maybe not yourself, but seeing someone catch a fish on a lure, that gives you confidence, right?
Sure.
Secondhand confidence, right? So we had been talking to Mike from Waterwolf Lures a lot. He's a super nice guy. And we bought some tube jigs.
And some other stuff.
Yeah. We bought some tube jigs, and I'm talking 9-inch tube jigs, right?
Yeah.
And I'd fished them that summer. I had a few follows, no takers. I was kind of like, what the heck, man? Everyone praises that these are the best baits ever. And I was just fishing them wrong. And maybe I wasn't fishing the best area, but I was fishing them wrong. So I went fishing with Bobby, and you were giving me tips on how to work it and twitch it on slack line and all this stuff. And I caught a fish, and then I was able to replicate that again, fishing with our buddy Paul. We went out, me and Andrew, and we kind of fished a similar area on a different lake, and using the same technique, caught another one on the tube all by myself. So I was like, oh, that's awesome. So even something little like how you work a bait, maybe not necessarily where you're fishing it, but how you work the bait back to the boat can make a huge difference if you just get those tips. People pay other people hundreds of dollars to watch their golf swing and critique them. But when you're fishing, all of a sudden everyone has egos. Oh, no, I know what I'm doing. And it's this guy's a professional, right? You can watch me and tell me what I'm doing wrong. I don't want to waste time. I want to catch fish. Teach me your ways, I want to catch fish on the tube. So I feel like that's an issue, right? With some people, they're just too cocky.
Yeah.
We can all learn from someone.
I can guarantee you,
Yeah,
might
and I
be one of the
mean,
guys.
I
Sorry,
have
go ahead,
lots of.
Bobby.
Oh, I was just saying, I have lots of guests that come out with me that end up wanting me to fish with them throughout the day so that they can see how I work stuff or how I use a lure, and because sometimes that information is more valuable than catching a fish on that day, right? Because you can take that home with you and catch fish in the future. So
Mhm. I was gonna
100%.
say it's.
yeah,
And I was gonna go ahead.
I was gonna say like Bobby was saying earlier, talking about taking people, on a guided trip, and sometimes it's take a portion of the day to teach them how to cast. Like if I go fishing with Bobby, I'm gonna be like, all right, teach me how to cast and work these baits, because I do want to learn those techniques, because like you said, the information you get from a guide is, and I hope this episode is a really good example of the amount of information you can get from someone like Bobby. Is incredible,
Yeah.
and that is where your value is, to catch that fish. And you probably will be catching fish with a guy like Bobby on the boat helping you do it. You're gonna have a good time that day, but the information you're getting, that's what you're paying for. That's what you can take away and have for every other fishing trip going forward, is that knowledge, and that's huge. And especially with musky fishing, like when Jesse came back from fishing with Bobby, because I learned from Jesse what he what he taught me, and our musky game went up by years of experience of just our own, because musky especially, it takes so much time on the water to figure out where they're going to be, to figure out how to fish, where to be effective on the water. You'd be wasting days, and we were wasting days and days and days of fishing, trying to fish for musky, because we just didn't have the information. But one day, it was a guided trip. Jesse's like, all right, here's the plan. We're doing this, 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 this. And every time we go with the guide, we come back, we're like, all right, we're putting these things into action. And our fishing has been growing by leaps and bounds the past couple of years of being able to talk to these guys in the podcast. And that's what we wanted to really, showcase when we have, guides in the show, like Bobby, is the amount of stuff you can learn. Your fishing game will improve like tenfold.
Yeah, if you are listening to this podcast and you're like, that's a good point, I never thought of that, anything like that, this is just a fraction. Like this podcast here with Bobby, it's like a 2-part podcast, awesome information. This is like a free, amazing podcast for you guys. Most guys would pay big money to fish with Bobby and learn this stuff. So, we're giving you guys a good deal. But if you go fishing with Bobby or another guide, but not another guide, just pick Bobby because he's legit. You learn so much, like Andrew said. So going back into my tube jig thing. So Bobby taught me how to fish a tube better, the legit way. So I just want to show you, on a side note, some of the tubes I just got. So check this out. I don't know if I'm actually going to use this, but I always wanted to try a bottom bounce rig. So see, 2 hooks.
yes,
Might
sir.
be good around weeds, right?
Yeah,
Hitting the bottom. But anyway, this is the 9-inch. And that's pretty much a standard size, I guess, in the Kawarthas, like in the summer, early fall,
Yeah.
But last year I was fishing with Bobby and he was chucking this giganto. And I was like, oh man, I got to get me one of those bad boys. So I ordered one from Mike. And this isn't even a big one. I think this is an 11-inch. But a bait like this, if you don't musky fish, and what I'm holding up, if you're listening, it's a big tube, a musky tube. It's 11 inches long. It's thick. Like it's almost as thick as my wrist. It's got a blade on the back, 3 treble hooks. And I think it weighs like 6 or 7 ounces. Like it's a big bait. But even a bait like this isn't too big, as I've learned. I've always kind of shied away from the giant stuff. I'm like, oh, I'll just use this. But everyone I fish for with musky in the fall, they're like, you got to put on a big bait. Sometimes, not all the time. So I've been finding it very exciting to throw these bigger baits sometimes in the fall. It's very like satisfying when you catch a musky on a big musky bait on a big musky rod. It's like, yeah, manly. You know what I mean?
yeah. Oh, and we were chatting about it before the podcast started, and I have this 115-inch. I was telling you guys, I got this 115-inch gator tube from Waterwolf, in a red color. I call it Clifford, and I've thrown it a bunch, and I've honestly yet to catch a giant muskie on it. I've caught lots of smaller muskies on it. So if you think you're throwing too big of a bait to get bit, you're definitely not. Sometimes it's what triggers the fish in general, is that bigger presentation. And Yeah, like Jesse said, it's fun. There's something special about catching them on giant baits. Um, Even if you don't throw them all year, just to be like, yeah, like I caught a muskie on this, and it's a bait that's as big as a house cat.
Yeah.
Like it's yeah,
or
there's
or it is a house cat. Who knows?
more,
They
yeah.
haven't done that since the 50s,
So-
Jesse.
Yeah, that's chipmunk. So when it comes to musky fishing, I know you kind of discussed different places. Oftentimes, like when I was fishing with you, we were fishing pretty deep, like not super deep, but it was like a nice deep, like little drop off area with rocks and stuff like that. So oftentimes when you're fishing baits, this is a question that I always thought, especially in the fall. I never realized or I didn't have any confidence, like how far is say a muskie's sitting down on the bottom? How far is that thing going to come up for my bait? Do you always have to let the bait sink all the way down to the fish? Or is this fish going to, if he's hungry, he's going to come up and smack it?
He's gonna come up. Like now, again, I'm gonna bring up the live scope here again, but I have seen it with the live scope. On the lake that we fished, which we fished Lower Buckhorn Lake that day. There's a lot of, especially when you get out in the channel, there's a lot of 30, 40-foot depths. And a lot of the spots that we're fishing are shallower stuff, say 10 to 15 feet of water, but close to that 30 to 40-foot depth. And there's been lots of times where I'm fishing out there. Also with, we mentioned Paul there. This was actually a trip that I was on with Paul. And it was the funniest thing. He was picking out a bird's nest or something out of his reel, and his musky tube was just sinking a little bit, down below the surface. And we were sitting over a deep hole, like a 60-foot hole. And now that one, I don't know how deep it came out. He caught this muskie. It came up and hit his tube while it was sinking. It must have only been down 10, 20 feet max over a great big 60-foot hole. And he snaps his reel closed and starts reeling up, and his rod just starts bending. And he caught that muskie. But since then, I've gone back to that same spot, and I've looked around. And because I really want to catch one jigging, I think that would be really cool. I haven't done it yet, but I've had lots of them follow. So I'll drop down like Waterwolf makes a Shadzilla version, which it's meant to be jigged. It's like a Bondi bait kind of, and you jig that thing. And I've seen muskies come up from 40, 50 feet now, maybe not as soon as it touches the water, but once that bait gets down to 10, 15 feet, you'll see those marks go right up. It's crazy. And how fast they move is crazy. And the other thing is they'll come right up, and then, your bait will be sitting, say 15 feet down, and then they'll just sit at 20 and stare at it. And, you're trying to work it. And like, again, it hasn't happened yet. I haven't caught one yet doing it, but I've been close a few times. And they're looking up, like when something starts coming into their zone, and it doesn't have to be 5 feet away, they'll fly up.
That's hilarious. We actually last week's episode, we talked a bit about live scope, just our experience using it with different people. And we talked about the pros and cons. And one of the cons, remember, Andrew, was the fact that live scope is annoying because you see fish looking at your lure, but they won't hit it. That's infuriating. And that happened to us in the spring. We were walleye fishing, and we had like a little swim bait swimming right over the school of walleye, and they were like looking up at it, went back down. We're like, come on. So
I just wanted to say that
pretty funny.
Some of our acute listeners, I'm not sure if Bobby realizes, but that's the second time he's brought up live scope, which means that under contract, he's going to supply a free live scope to one of our Patreon. Imagine
man.
that. That's the new rule. If someone mentions, live scope on the podcast, they have to buy us one. No, that's.
I don't like that rule.
We'll let it slide this time. Maybe you just didn't see it in the fine print.
I do. Yeah, you didn't. Bobby didn't sign any contract, so I don't think we can hold him to anything. So speaking of muskie, in the fall, if you can only pick 3 baits for a beginner to get, what are you going to pick?
Tube. Always. Anybody who knows me, anybody who's fished muskies with me knows I'm obsessed with them. It's my favorite bait. I've had the most success with them out of everything. And I find that a lot of people don't use them, and I don't mind sharing this because muskies are one of those things that I think everybody should get out and experience catching them. Obviously respect them, treat them, handle them with care, safe fish care and stuff, get them back healthy. But throw a tube if you haven't yet, and you're going to be surprised at how much and the quality of fish that you'll catch with them. So tube, number one. Second, another one that I talk about all the time is the shadzilla, or a swim bait in general. Again, super versatile bait. You can fish it at several different depths. Most of them, including the shadzilla, come with different weights, shallow rig, a mid-depth rig, a deep rig. So you can kind of choose what bait you want to throw for what spot you're fishing, or, where you want to target these fish, what section of the water column. So that's two. And three, this is a bait that me and my buddies have used over the past few years that I'm sure there's other ones on the market, but this one I find is kind of unique. It's the Shum Shum Quickie by Chaos Tackle. So it's a glide bait, essentially, with a little soft plastic tail out the back. But it runs really, really shallow. It's not one of the glide baits that's going to have a fast sink to it and run deep. It's a shallow glide bait. You can work it so that it zigzags or just kind of pulls forward, and they eat it good. Like for a lot of these spots like shoals that we fish, it's great because you can cast it up there and it's not going to sink right into the rocks. It's got a kind of a slow fall, and you can start working it right from the top of the shoal down. The slower you work it, it will sink slowly, but you can kind of work it at whatever depth you want. So that bait in particular, I really like. It's made by Chaos Tackle. I'm pretty sure you can buy it at most shops that have Chaos stuff.
Hard to find though.
Hard
to find. Yeah.
Yeah. They, I know Peterborough Pro Tackle had them for a bit, but I don't think they've brought them in this year.
Yeah. I did pick up a hellhound. Just that's probably one of the easiest glide baits to find at most stores.
Yeah, and hellhounds are good, but the only thing is they don't have as slow of a sink as the Shum Shum, which is why I like the Shum Shum so much. But glide bait, if I could choose a third, a glide bait's a great choice.
And do you think a glide bait is so effective in the later fall? Maybe is because it has a reaction strike effect, but it's also really slow.
I don't know if it's fall specific, because I've caught them really good during cold fronts. Honestly, a day like today where we've had hot weather and boom, we're hitting a cold snap. That's a great time for a glide bait. You're kind of looking it along the same lines as when you want to throw a jerk bait for bass, right? Where you want that pause, or you want that little bit of a delay for the fish to follow your bait and choose a point in time when it's going to strike. It doesn't have to follow it as quickly as it does a swim bait or a bucktail or stuff like that. So cold front, colder water for sure, but not fall specific. But definitely in my top three.
Awesome. So you probably have a little list of lures that you're going to buy. And again, we always recommend to buy local, buy at your local tackle shop. Some of our favorite tackle shops, again, not affiliated with them, Gagnon Sports, Taco Bros. I was just out in Belleville getting some musky lures at Pro Tackle out there. There's so many cool places that you can pick up baits. So definitely do it. And if you do buy anything from any of these shops, make sure you tell them that we sent you, and they'll probably say, who are they? So anyway, those are some great tips for all those species we talked about. I'm sure that I learned a lot myself. So I'm sure if you're listening, you learned a lot too. But before we end, I actually put a little Q&A on our Instagram. And I asked some of our Instagram followers about questions to ask Bobby. And we actually got a bunch. Now, if we don't answer your question, it's because we already covered it. A lot of people are like, what's your favorite musky lure? Well, we already covered that. So I'm only going to read the relevant ones. We're not going to do a lot of them. But you don't have to answer these in depth. It can kind of be like a 30-second answer there.
Sure.
Okay, so John P. Fishing on Instagram, he says, what water temps do you find turns the smallmouth bite insane?
65 again, fall turnover.
Nice, quick and to the point.
Short
Me and Andrew never do that. We'll just be like, it's going to be quick, boys. And it's 4 hours later. We're like, that's why live scope's the worst. Just kidding. We love it.
Ramble.
We're not going to get into that. Here's a good question from the pet detective. He says, how do you decide where to stop first on the lake? And how long will you wait in an area if you're not catching anything?
Okay, so where to stop first on a lake, I think it's that's a
That's complicated.
yeah, that can go a lot of different ways. Like some lakes, when you're musky fishing, like I have a milk run of spots that I usually hit, depending on the time of year. I kind of just sometimes I start with the closest one. You know what I mean? Like it's like, all right, we're gonna go musky fishing. Like if I have a spot kind of like our trip where I'm like, yeah, there's one there, we're gonna go get it. That's different. But like say I haven't been out on a lake for a few weeks and I'm going out and I don't have it right dialed in, but I know the spots to go and I know where we're going to fish throughout the day, then a lot of the times it's just like, all right, we're going to hit here and we're going to do a big horseshoe as we go along the lake and hit this spot, this spot, this spot, this spot, right? But then, of course, you have your confidence spots. If you have a spot where you go out in the morning and are catching nice fish on top water, or you go out, oh yeah, I always catch big smallies off this point in the morning, go to that spot, right? Or change things up, do a homework day, right? Go try something, a different spot and see if that's a spot that fires better in the morning. Um, but I really try to stay open-minded. I try not to get into the same routine if I can avoid it, especially with bass. And then in terms of how long I fish a spot, I think with muskies, it's longer because you may have a muskie in the zone and it doesn't move the first time it sees your bait. You need to sit in a zone and kind of cycle through some baits and see what's going on. But with bass, like I usually have a 15-minute rule. If I roll up to a zone and I don't get bit in 15 minutes, or if I roll up to a zone and I don't see anything on my live scope, I'm gone.
That's hilarious because last week someone asked us a similar question. And as Andrew was reading the question, I said 14 minutes. So Bobby is a little more patient than me. 15 minutes. Okay.
Yeah.
I was going to say, when you said have a homework day, I just picture Bobby's mom just like, Bobby, have you done your homework yet? And he's like, Mom,
Never.
be quiet.
Never.
All right. Here's another question from our buddy Paul, who
Great
we
guy.
fished with that day. Yeah. Super nice guy.
Great.
He says, is it musky or is it musky? And the spelling is musky with a Y or musky with an IE? Which one do you think?
Oh boy.
There's only one right
I'm
answer
gonna
here.
rattle so many people with this. If you're in Canada, it's IE. If you're in America, it's Y. It's like,
Fair.
yeah, that's how I go off it. Musky Maniac guys, let's just pretend they're American because they spell it musky and they're from Canada. But I won't hold Mulligan to that. He's a
nice guy.
He's a nice guy too.
Yeah.
But yeah.
All right. Super Noof 71. He says, what's your favorite smallmouth bass throw? I know you kind of covered a bunch, but let's just say all year round, if you could only have one smallmouth bass lure or presentation, what would it be?
Tube.
Okay.
Easy
Is
answer.
there
Tube.
I have a kind of a subsequent question then. That may be your most effective then, I'm guessing. What would be the one that you'd like catching smallmouth on the most? It may not be your most effective.
Popper. Who doesn't love topwater fishing, right?
Right. If you say no, you're crazy.
Yeah.
No offense to the crazy people. We love you too.
Yeah.
So here's a question from I Catch Dinks. He says, best way to make good on a slow day guiding.
Best way to make
Prime
good
lunch.
on a slow day guiding. Where are we going for lunch?
Yeah.
Like
we fished with Brian, Halliburton Fishing Guide. When it was slow, he was dancing for us. Do you do that?
Brian's got me beat. I don't think I have quite the same dance moves as Brian.
His weren't that good, but it was the fact that he tried. I was so happy. Anyway, you don't have to answer that.
But for the slow day of guiding, like honestly, I try to move around a lot. I try to make it so that you want your guests to know that you're doing everything you can to get them on fish, right? So I'm not just sitting on the same spot being, oh, they're not biting today. You know what I mean? Like I'm moving around. I'm trying to figure something out. Some days the fish can beat me too. Being a guide doesn't mean that, I go out and don't have tough days ever. I have tough days all the time too. But, even if it means grinding on that live scope, looking around to try to get somebody a fish, like some days I don't even turn my live scope on. I just go out and I fish with them. Right. But some days I got to flick that live scope on and put my head down and troll around until I see some marks and then be like, all right, like, let's get it, cast at these ones. And I think as long as I just put in 100% effort when I'm out there, don't get lazy with it. And of course, keep a positive mindset. Like, you'll never see me on the boat being like, oh, they're not biting. This sucks. Like, it's going to be a slow day. Like, you'll never see me do that unless I'm with Griff. Maybe if I'm with Griff. But yeah,
I was gonna say I can attest to that. When we went out, it was tough conditions. It was super windy, and you were like, "Yeah, we're gonna fish these spots," and we were just flying around spot. Like, it wasn't boring. It was exciting because, like, hey, you know what? Like, part of the experience too. Like, you're paying a guide. Usually, you're in a bass boat. Like, that's pretty cool. You know, like, I'm in a canoe all the time. So hey, I'm shooting down the lake going 50 miles an hour. Like, hey, this is pretty fun. So it's cool. And I think a lot of people, they have realistic expectations when they go fishing. Like, when I go fishing for muskie, even if it's with a guide, I don't expect to catch a muskie. Like, the guide is putting me in the best possible circumstances to catch a muskie, but it's muskie fishing.
yeah,
The fish of 10,000 casts. Like, you can't be like, oh man, I can't believe we didn't catch 7 muskie. So I have a feeling that most people have the realization that, you know, nature and animals, they're not super predictable or cooperative all the time. So anyway, here's a good question. It's more about tubes. So I know we covered a bit about this, but Jeremy says this. He says, tips for fishing a tube for smallmouth in fall, and he wants to know more about color, cadence, and size.
okay. So, color, cadence, and size. Like, if you haven't tried the 2.5-inch tubes, if you're still throwing like 3 or 3.5-inch tubes, you really should try downsizing to the 2.5-inch. They match the crayfish size and like the goby size a lot better. I mean, just look at them. Like, when you have them, like, they're the perfect little bite-sized snack, you know? So, like, yeah, 2.5-inch tubes without a doubt. If you haven't tried that new Juvie Craw 2 by Great Lake Finesse, again, small little 2.5-inch profile, unbelievable bait. But when it comes to like working the tubes, color, green pumpkin. I don't get fancy. Green pumpkin, done. Like, you don't need to get fancy. Green pumpkin, if it's got some fleck in it, sure, but green pumpkin. And when it comes to working it, on a good day, you can cast it out and you could be hopping it, you could be scooting it. On a good day, they'll find it, they'll smash it. But on tough days, you would be surprised at how many times you can just cast out. And try this next time you're fishing a tube and it's tough. For everybody listening, try this. Cast her out, let her hit the bottom, and once it's on the bottom, just reel so that your line is tight. You haven't moved the tube yet. It's just sitting there. Reel so that your line's tight and just leave it. And just hold it there for 10 seconds. And try getting in that habit while you're fishing, and you would be amazed at how many times you cast out, you let that hit bottom, and after 5 seconds of leaving it still, all of a sudden, bunk. It's incredible. And some of the biggest smallmouth are the ones that do that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something that is a lot easier said than done. I see tubes are one of the most used things on my boat when we're fishing smallmouth with my guests or even with myself in tournaments. And I have a lot of buddies that will attest to this, that there's certain days that the way that you move that tube, the way that I'm moving that tube over the way that Griff is moving it, over the way that my client's moving it, makes a huge difference. Huge. So give it a try. Just be patient with it. Keep that line tight so it's not moving. You're keeping that line tight so that you can feel the bite. So if you feel that if you have slack in your line, you're not going to feel the bite. But if you keep that line tight, you'll feel that little tap of that tube hitting the top of their mouth.
That's extra juice there for you guys.
Yeah, give it a try.
I'm trying to think what like young people would say. That's the Riz. The skibbly dobbly.
The Riz.
Oh, no.
I don't know. I'm over 30. I don't know about that stuff.
What do they say on TikTok nowadays, right?
I have no clue. We are on TikTok, but I never go on it.
Yeah, same here.
So speaking of TikTok, if someone's interested in checking you out or booking a guided day, what's the best way to find you?
So of course, go to my website. You can contact me through there, tobefishing.ca, nice and simple. And I'm super active on my Instagram and my Facebook. So Facebook, it's just To Be Fishing Guiding Service, and Instagram, it's at @2B_fishing. And you send me a DM or a message, I'll get back to you.
Awesome. And again, we're going to link all of this below in the show notes. So it's easy enough. You just scroll down, you can click on this link. And hey, even if you don't even live anywhere near here, go on Instagram, smash that follow button, follow Bobby. He's an awesome
Smash
angler.
it.
Smash it. Because sometimes he posts cool tips. You know, he's not just one of those guys that hides everything. He probably hides some stuff, a lot of stuff, but there's oftentimes really good tips and baits he's catching fish on. You can check it out. And then if you're ever down in the Kawartha area, which is an awesome fishing location, me and Andrew pretty much, that's where we fish most of the time. You can hit Bobby up and he'll take you out for an awesome day in the water. So this was an awesome double episode, 2 episodes. You guys are getting spoiled. 2 double episodes in a row. September's double month, double.
Double.
So we'd just like to thank Bobby again. I know you're a busy guy. He had a guide today. He's got the raccoon eyes because he's got the suntan. He's been out on the water. He's just bagged after a long day. And here we are just talking. And he just wants us to shut up so he can go to bed. But he did it. So that's awesome. Thanks again, Bobby.
Thanks for having me, guys.
This is the Bobby you get at the end of the day. Think about that. Think of how great he was for that guest today. Or maybe he was saving his energy for the podcast and we're sorry to that guest. I don't know.
No, if you like nighttime Bobby, you should see me in the morning.
It's terrible. I've seen it. Just kidding. So anyway, we'd like to thank you for that. Again, also, are you going to be at CanCast 2025, Bobby?
Nice.
Of course.
Awesome. So again, we always talk about the CanCast Fishing Show. This one's coming up in April, I believe. I forget the exact date. But if you are at CanCast this year coming up, make sure you stop by. Bobby has a booth. You can talk to him. And he had some cool giveaways. That's where me and Andrew got these hats. Look, we're wearing... If you're listening to this, we're all 3 of us right now are wearing Bobby's Fishing, 2B Fishing hats. We look like weird clones.
They're both wearing Shimano hoodies. I'm the odd man.
I know.
I'm wearing a plaid shirt, and they're wearing.
See,
I popped on the podcast, and Jesse looks just like me, and I'm like, oh.
Bobby thinks I look like him. What?
Are you having the exact?
That is such a compliment.
The exact same hats?
No, I'm glad. We're like 2.5 men here. We got the 2, and then we got
the half.
The half over there on the right.
Are you having the exact same hats this year, Bobby?
You know what? Like I still have a bunch I made a whole bunch of them last year, so I still have those. I've tried a few different designs and nothing's really like clicked too much. I usually post them on Instagram and see if people like them before I get them made.
Is it the same brand of hat base, though? Like, is it still a classic? Perfect.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I just wanted to mention.
Yeah.
I've become very finicky with my hats, and you often see me wearing Musky Maniacs hats. This is my go-to. This is another one. My wife's landscaping company, actually, they have the same thing, and it's all the classic. And for me, it's the most comfortable baseball hat. Like, I love it. I love these. So as soon as Bobby gave it to me, and I'm like, he got the good one. I'll actually wear this hat.
I just want one of those AI slogans to be on the back for next year, though. That's my only thing. So anyway, we won't keep you guys any longer. We thank everyone for listening, for watching. If you're a Patreon member, we really appreciate it. You help cover the cost for the show every single week, and you get entered into all the giveaways that we have as well. But before we end this episode, we have, as tradition states, the quote of the week. And we were nice guys this episode, and we told Bobby about it, so we had time to think about it. So it better be good.
So honestly, like when you first said that AI thing, I was gonna steal it on you and make that the quote of the day. That first one about like making fish nervous or something like that. I really like that. But I don't have anything too clever. I've been all over the place talking. So condensed. Everything is condensed in the fall. Just remember that, folks.